How we doing? How we doing? It's Saturday, April 29th, almost May. Sheesh, the year's going quick. It's your boy Coffee Kid back with another episode of The Observation, episode 12. So we're kind of well underway. Today we got a video about plot, specifically plot in the Bible, why it matters, why it's significant, what it tells us as we read, how it can be a tool to encourage further reading and more in-depth reading. There's a lot of things about the plot in the Bible, and I think even further, I was having a conversation with a friend one time. Kind of the more I observe, like, movie production, modern literature production, and some of the plot lines, characteristics, nature of a lot of the characters if it's fiction, just the rise and fall of the storyline from the intro to the climax to the conclusion. A lot of those elements, including a lot of the character flaws and a lot of, characters in popular movies or TV shows and general, settings, a lot of that, when you take a look, is very much derived from the Bible in terms of the root morals of stories and the root takeaways. So I think as you watch this video, I would keep that in mind and just try to think about what it reminds you of, because for a long time the Bible was the only piece of literature that people read, especially after it was compiled and canonized as a holy book, and all of them were compiled together. So it's an interesting book. I mean, it's really the most complex piece of literature in existence, and it's the antithesis of literature. I saw a quote on the Joe Rogan podcast from Jordan Peterson talking about the Bible being the antithesis of literature and how most writing is derived from it, whether or not the author is aware of it or not. It's kind of it was a really deep thought, but maybe I'll pull up that video after this after this gets done, but just a thought as we jump in. But without further ado, let's get right in.
We're learning how to read different types of literature in the Bible, and we're going to start by talking about biblical narrative.
So narratives, in their most basic form, have characters in a setting going through a series of events. And how those events are selected and then arranged by an author, that's called the plot.
A basic plot line begins with a character in her setting, but then something new or unexpected happens, causing problems that lead up to some ultimate conflict, which is then resolved and the character finds herself changed, living in a new normal.
Now, when reading narratives, it's important to understand every scene in the context of its larger plot line. You can make the same story have a totally different message if you ignore where it occurs in the plot. This happens all the time when people read the Bible.
Really?
Yeah, take for example the story about Gideon. There's this well-known scene where Gideon's trying to discern whether God will help him win a battle, and he requests a sign from God.
Yeah, Gideon lays a wool fleece on the ground and asks that in the morning the fleece be wet with dew, but the ground totally dry, and God does it.
Now, if you look at this scene just by itself, what is the conflict?
How can Gideon know if he'll succeed?
And the resolution?
Test God, ask for a sign, and find out.
Yeah, and that's how many people actually read this story, and it totally misses the point because it's ignoring the larger plot line.
Really?
Yeah, so let's start from the beginning. You'll get the context. The story begins with Gideon and the Israelites living in fear because they're oppressed by an invading people, the Midianites.
Got it.
Then there's the call to action. God commissions Gideon to defeat the Midianites and save Israel.
Yeah, this is shaping up to be a good story.
But then Gideon's super hesitant, so he asks God to do this magic trick, a sign, so I can know it's really you talking to me. And God stoops to his level. He gives him a sign by lighting this fire on an altar.
So Gideon's already asked for a sign.
And that's not all. In the next scene, God tells Gideon to tear down an altar to another god, but Gideon's so afraid, he does it at night.
So Gideon's skeptical and also a bit of a coward.
Then we come to the moment where Gideon's about to face the Midianites, and he's still uncertain, so he asks for another sign, the fleece. He says, I want to know if you'll save Israel by my hand.
And God gives him that sign.
And he's still uncertain, so he asks for even one more sign, which is just a variation of the previous sign.
Okay, so Gideon's asking for way too many signs.
Exactly. In the larger context, it's clear the plot conflict is not how can Gideon discern the mysterious will of God. The real conflict is when will this guy get his act together and start trusting God?
Okay, so then what's the resolution?
We have to keep reading. So Gideon gathers this huge army, 30,000 soldiers to fight the Midianites, and God says, no, way too many men. He whittles the army down to 300.
Why would he do that?
Well, Gideon's been testing God, so now God returns the favor. He tells Gideon to arm these 300 soldiers with trumpets and torches, and then surround the Midianites at night and make all this noise in the hills, which sounds ridiculous, but Gideon does it. And the noise scares the Midianites into this frenzy. They start destroying each other in the dark while Gideon looks on safely from the hills.
So this story isn't offering the reader tips for discerning God's will.
No, it's about God's commitment to use weak people with deep flaws to do more than they could have imagined.
Okay, so short scenes, like Gideon and the fleece, are combined with other scenes making up a larger plot line. And tracing the conflict and resolution through the plot helps you see the message the author's trying to get across.
Now, Gideon's story has been set alongside many other stories that are also about these flawed, often questionable leaders called judges. And each of these has its own internal plot line. But then altogether they make up a whole movement of the biblical story, the period of the judges, and that has its own unified plot line.
And there are many movements within the story of the Bible.
Exactly. And all the smaller stories, hundreds of them, they fit within the context of their own movements. And then these movements together make up the building blocks of the grand plot line of the whole story of the Bible.
So no matter where I'm reading in the Bible, I need to pay attention to these different layers of plot so I can read each story in context.
Exactly. The Bible is such a sophisticated piece of literature. And so all these smaller plot lines keep overlapping, building up the tension. And when you back up, you can see how they've all been woven together into the unified story that leads to Jesus.
Crazy video, man. It's interesting to go along with Gideon's story. Like back when I was prefacing this video, when God called him back to only take on the enemy with 300 soldiers and horns, and it caused him to go crazy. Even that section of the story reminds me of a recent movie. It reminds me of the most recent Black Panther, where I forget the name of the character, or even the ancient Aztec civilization, one of their methods of weaponry is the sonic attack, where they sing some sort of hymn, and it subdues their enemies. It subdues the ears of their enemies. So, I mean, we're in 2023. Maybe that movie came out late 2022. I can't quite remember. But even the existence of that, like when the human imagination has taken the author Stan Lee to that. And that's one of the greatest storytellers of our generation. And even some of his stuff is derived from ultimately the Bible. It existed before. So it's interesting, and it reminds me of this verse in Ecclesiastes talking about how nothing is new. Nothing is new under the sun. Very much, I mean, it's true that the Bible is the origin, the antithesis of literature, and it cuts so deep that people don't even like it. They've never read it, and they disagree with it. That's how deep it cuts. Because it, through storytelling, it offers a commentary about our own nature in such an eloquent and accurate way that even those who don't believe feel threatened or feel offended by it. Just like if you were to go up to your brother who's messing up, he's really acting a fool. When you tell him the truth, he's not gonna like it. Like, people think that the truth unites. But before the truth unites, it first divides, right? That's just the reality of it. Truth cuts through your soul, man. Truth cuts through the soul. That's why they say the Bible is a sword. It cuts deep in our nature, even to those who deny the power of the Bible and the power of God. So, nevertheless, the verse I'm referring to is Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 9. But I'll start a couple verses earlier in verse 7 for some context. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was here already, long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. I mean, it's facts. I think if I were to try to break that down, there is nothing new. History repeats itself. And the last verse sums it up. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. So history repeats itself in many ways. The character flaws and the plot lines and the underlying nature of ourselves and how we interact with each other often repeats itself. We don't learn from it as much as we like to say we do, because we keep doing the same things. Suffering still exists. If we learned from our mistakes and we truly learned how to innovate in a moral way, I think there would be a lot less suffering. But we often exploit each other, and we often create facades that we're not doing it just for our own comfort, to save pain, to save the pain of ourselves from hearing truth. And I think that's probably somewhat of a truth for everyone, regardless. But no one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. Let's take the African American community, for example, or even just the African continent of Africa. In 1964, some of the most revered civil rights and Pan-Africanists met in Ethiopia, talking about what the threat to our unity was. And it was our division, our resistance to sacrifice ourselves and our current generation in order for prosperity of the next. You know, they talk about unifying one army, consolidating a currency, value adding to their natural resources rather than shipping raw resources to other countries just to buy it back from them after it's manufactured and processed. You know, they talked about these things in the 60s. So when this verse talks about those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them, we as a people, even like, we're not invigorated to even listen 40 years back to what 60 years back to what they were saying. What they were telling us was the reality of the state of Africa, the state of African Americans. We keep doing the same things. We don't look back. People do look back, but action doesn't get sparked as a result. You know, it's very much the change in our mental state lags from the people who like actually speak out. Like, there's a lag. There's a cognitive lag in our reaction and what drives us. Because it's easy to be comfortable. Like, when you live in a first world country especially, your standard of living is even, you know, a middle to low standard of living is comfortable. You're not pressed. You got your own problems. You're trying to save your own money. You're not pressed to do these things. So it just goes to show we are going to repeat ourselves. And the Bible told us that. That's part of the plot of the Bible, believe it or not. And it's funny enough how that works, but I think I'm going to leave it there. I think this was a really cool video, and I think if you haven't read the Bible, I'd encourage you to pick it up. And if you do, start in the New Testament. And then once you finish that, go back to the Old Testament. And then a lot of dots will be connected. But I think it's a book that you don't just read once. You read it over a lifetime. You repeat it. But yeah, I think I'm going to keep, you know, this is a 20-part series, How to Read the Bible, put out by the Bible Project. Shout out to them. This is great content. I think I'm going to, you know, sprinkle some of these in over the course of some of the episodes. You know, sprinkle in some cultural and socioeconomic commentary, but also sprinkle in the biblical stuff, because it is very relevant to everything about humanity. But yeah, I think I'm going to leave it there. Denver smacking Phoenix. Too bad, too sad, Kevin. But if you made it to this point in the video, I appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate everyone who's you know, taking time out of their day to watch some of this content. I hope it's encouraging. I hope it is informative. And if so, you know, please leave a like. Subscribe if you're new. Turn on post notifications just so you can see the new videos that I'm throwing up once a week. And yeah, don't be afraid to leave a comment. I'll always respond if someone's leaving a comment. If you have a question, maybe a disagreement, I'm always happy to engage in dialogue. But without further ado, I think that's enough said for the night. It's been your boy Coffee Kid, back with another episode of The Observation. Yeah, enjoy the week, y'all. Stay blessed.